Hello, welcome to the new edition of Deals and Deadlines with Hadley. I'm Matt. Thanks so much for making us a part of your afternoon and your week. Deals and Deadlines, very simply, gives you a little sports business with a guy who's making these big million and billion-dollar deals. Our friend, yes, Hadley, sitting on that end of the table. We have a busy show for you today. We're going to talk to Chuck Lillie. He's the new general manager of West Virginia football. When I say general manager, you think the NFL, right? Well, it's now entered the college space, so we'll talk to him about what the job entails, his time at Oklahoma, and some of the NIL changes to come. So we'll get to that coming up shortly. But Hadley, let's start with what's going on around the NFL world, because it doesn't seem to stop. Turns out Netflix wasn't happy with just their Christmas Day doubleheader. Now Netflix wants to get into the every Sunday business of the NFL. In fact, as the story goes, they want to win one of the new packages for either what used to be the NFC or AFC package, now CBS or Fox, and they plan to outbid, if they need to, either one of the networks to land the Sunday football package, which, if you're Roger Goodell sitting in New York, this is music to your ears. Is this realistic?
It is ching-ching to their ears. I mean, obviously, they're not done with, but they're adding to the Jake Pauls of the world and all that stuff, and now they want to get into full-time sports, right? First of all, let's backtrack and talk about the current deal goes through 2033. Right. They could void it out, I think, in 2029. So we still have a number of years before anything would drastically change. It would be very interesting to see if it just comes down to the numbers, and it appears that that's what happens more times than not. But will it be one game? Will it be multiple games? Will it be part of the Sunday ticket? Will they remove it from the Sunday ticket? There's so many different things, because now you have YouTube involved, and so there's a lot of things that move in place. Personally, I think Netflix is perfect for the new Sunday morning game, right? Because that's going to be the new permanent game time, at least on the East Coast, a 9 a.m. game, right. A game that's going to be in Europe somewhere. Great for Netflix, and then you keep the other things in place. But at the end of the day, the way Roger Goodell or whoever's in charge, likes to operate it, it comes down to money and, subscriptions. Is it going to scare people away? There's a lot of things that have to happen, but I think it's great for the NFL regardless if it ends up with Netflix, because it's going to only move up the total, which will mean more money for players. And so it's a great thing for everybody.
It's another bidder, which is going to be a big part of this. One of the networks has to really think hard. Do we want to take the chance of losing it? Because the last time CBS lost the NFL to Fox many moons ago, this was 1994, they were really still paying the piper from a bad TV deal they made with baseball in 1990, so it really cost them their ability to bid on it. But they really think that did irreparable damage to their network. David Letterman's talked about it for years. He's like, the NFL left CBS, it hurt my late night, it hurt their prime time. So what is Netflix thinking? Well, so I've got some numbers from the Super Bowl. We had some big picture numbers, but now we have some specifics. A record number, 182.8 million unique viewers watched at least 1 minute of the Super Bowl on Fox and other platforms.
It's a great stat, isn't it? 1 minute.
It is, but it also tells you, if you're Netflix, for example, and I use that specific number, it's a vehicle to drive everything else on the network, 100%. Right? And they know it might be a cost, prohibitive thing in the moment, although they said they made $800 million in revenue. If you're Netflix, what you can do to promote every other vehicle on that streaming platform is what you would do with the NFL. If you're the NFL, the only concern I would have, you do lose some eyes. There's no way you're going to match streaming with over-the-air network TV, and I don't know how much that matters anymore. It might not, because you're right. It might just be the number that they write on a check, or the NFL might say, do we want to take the chance of losing this many million because they love to promote the amount of people that watch? I think that's the only thing they'd have to consider.
We always talk about losing, and you know what? They've never lost.
Right.
Even college football, they were concerned about adding games and doing things. You're going to lose an audience. It hasn't lost. In fact, there's been more eyes and more money. So at the end of the day, I don't think the NFL really cares about the eyes, right? Because you're not going to know till after the fact. They care about the numbers. And that's really what this comes down to is, is this going to change the landscape of football? And is it going to bring more money to the owners? And that's all the owners care about. I mean, no matter what sport it is, they care about bottom line for their franchise. If it trickles down to the players are supportive of it. Are less eyes going to be on it? Are true football fans going to leave the game? If your Netflix goes up $10 a month because of this, I know I'm going to continue.
Sure.
So it's part of the cost of doing business for the consumer. And I just think that it's going to be good and healthy for the bidding process. And at the end of the day, it's going to bring more money to everybody involved, except the consumer. It's going to cost more.
Well, except the consumer who keeps paying more and more and more to keep up with the Joneses to pay for this. All right, so let's talk about some NFL stuff. I almost said on the field, but affecting the field. So the franchise tag window in the NFL, it opened earlier in the week on Tuesday. At the point of when we're recording this middle of the week, we have not seen anybody tagged yet. There's a rumor the Bengals, again, with T. Higgins. I know the players don't like it. I know the agent doesn't like it. It's all relative to the big contract, the signing bonus. It's hard to complain about it because you're still getting a big fat number, just not what you want long term. So what's the best process if you're the player, if you're the representative, making sure you don't alienate the public or the team by saying this is an insult, we don't want to do it?
Again, we're not as agents concerned about the public per se. I mean, this is business, and it affects their income. I mean, I know we look at a franchise tag, we'll say the number's $20 million. And we're like, well, they're offering you $20 million. Why are you unhappy? Because the fair market value for someone, that player, may be $100 million. So it's really, I've dealt with the franchise and I've dealt with the transition tag, and it's not a great place to be in. Listen, it gives them some leverage to negotiate the long-term deal, and that's what you hope happens.
Yeah, you're buying more time.
But at the end of the day, and it takes you off the market. Mm-hmm. So it buys them time and takes you off the market. So it gives them some leverage. But good teams want players long-term. And so they use this vehicle if there's a point of no return where they can't negotiate or they've run out of time to negotiate, and they're using it as leverage. But if the goal is to keep the player long-term, not try to shortchange that player, and sign him to a fair market deal, even though you have this vehicle as leverage, that's what the good teams do.
Have you dealt with teams that, while they've maybe tagged with a franchise or a transition, well, you know that they want to try to get a deal done, you don't feel like they're making the full effort because they know they have that in their hip pocket? In other words, we don't have to really go the extra mile.
100%.
Yeah.
And that even trickles down to when you have a restricted free agent. There are different levels of tender, and when you get someone that, let's say, gets a second round tender, it's a lot of money. Well, is the goal, okay, now that we have a basis, let's negotiate off that? No. We're just going to keep him here for the 1 year, keep him at this price point. We're going to draft a player to replace him. And so, yes, he's expensive, so to speak, cap-wise this year, but we have no intention of doing a long-term deal. Yeah. So they use it to their advantage. I hate the restricted numbers. I hate the franchise tag, but it's part of negotiating. Mm-hmm. It's the give and take. There's only a few players every year that are affected versus the hundreds of players. So I think it's a vehicle that the league loves. And again, it's a give and take. Mm-hmm. So moving forward, now that we have it in place, it's like that. Even with basketball, we talk about super max deals. Mm-hmm. You go to another team under the current CBA, you're limited in how much you can make. And, is that really what the intent is of all this? So it's interesting to see how this all plays out. And by the time this show airs versus even the coming weeks, you're going to see some franchise tags for, potential unrestricted free agents. As
the NFL works, there's very little offseason. The combine will begin on Monday with guys showing up. On-field activity begins Thursday, and everything that happens around Indy, in theory, is a scouting exercise, right? We get to do measurables and medicals and find out about these players. But there's also another full portion that you and I have talked about that happens around the combine. It's one of the few events that gets everyone in the same place at the same time, weeks ahead of the new league year. So talk to us about what that whole kind of week or week plus looks like for what you do, the players and the teams.
Yeah, it's an amazing week. It's actually the only week that everybody is there. I mean, Super Bowl, some people come and don't come, especially personnel people for teams that aren't in it. Senior Bowl, you only have so many people there. So this is the Mecca. In addition to that, the NFLPA requires agents to attend an annual seminar. This is one of 3 opportunities. So most agents check that box and go there for that alone, and that's on Friday. And so it's a great way. And you're right, it's not just about the players that you have at the combine. It's about your veterans. It's about your future free agents. It's about your street free agents. So it is the time to network, talk business, break bread, have a cocktail.
But really, not tamper.
No, we Definitely.
No tampering. No.
Just for the record, there are no tampering restrictions with age.
Oh, yeah, it's teams. You do what you want, Hadley.
Correct. And I do what I want. But no, it's a great way to, again, a lot of times you meet with teams, not even about a current player, but it's about building those relationships. We've had GMs here on from the Braves. We've had other NFL people. We've had NBA people, baseball people we've had on the show. Relationships go a long way. And so that is a big part of what the Combine does. And yes, you do work on some things, and you may talk about current players and extensions, and new guys are now in new positions, and you've got to know them, but you never met them face to face. So it's a lot of networking. There's a lot of business being done. You deal with the certification with the NFLPA. It's a great week. I love Indy. I go to every Friday night. I take my staff to St. Elmo's Steakhouse.
That's the spot.
Yeah. And so it is truly a great week, and look forward to it every year.
All right, one more note off that. So I did see one interesting tidbit from NFL Rookie Watch that NFL scouts say they believe between 12 and 15 running backs could be taken in this draft in the first 3 rounds. Everything in the NFL is like sports. It's all cyclical. We went from we'll take a running back first in the draft to we'll never take a running back in the first round ever again. And this year, maybe it's just continuation off of Bijan Robinson or a few others that we've seen, but Ashton Genty, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, Cam Scatteraboo, Trevor Etienne, the list goes on. That is a huge number for a position that we all thought was just interchangeable, that teams might go back to spending quality high round picks on that position.
And I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's a lot of good running backs that fall within that draft grade, but I don't expect teams to do that. The only thing that could change is if there are a number. Listen, we now don't run a starting running back. It's a 1A and a 1B, and then there's a third string who's kind of a second string, because 1A and 1B are interchangeable and play a lot. I think it can come down to teams that have star running backs that are entering a contract year. They don't want to pay that player the money that player is going to demand, i.e. Cook, who went public and said he wants, I think, $15 million a year in Buffalo. And so now you have to say, all right, we may have to overdraft a player so we have somebody in place in case Cook does leave. But I just still think that the position's not as valued as it once was. We see it in veteran free agency. But that may lead to more running backs taken. I just don't see that many going that high. But we'll find out, in a few months.
All right, we'll talk to Chuck Lillie coming up. He's the first-year general manager at West Virginia football. How does that title mimic what we see in the NFL? We'll talk to him about that, the ever-changing landscape of NIL as Deals and Deadlines continues. All right, we continue with this episode of Deals and Deadlines with Hadley on Matt. I'll remind you guys, you can find this podcast on any podcast platform. Just search Deals and Deadlines. New episodes drop each and every Friday. Make sure you can find it wherever you get them. And subscribe, of course. And available to you on the 680 The Fan YouTube channel. All right, let's welcome in our guest, Chuck Lillie. He is the first-year general manager for West Virginia, formerly of Oklahoma, as the assistant GM there. And I know college football and college fans in general still have to get used to these titles, but we'll talk to Chuck about how that works now where he is. Chuck, we appreciate the time. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, guys. Happy to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. So when I say GM, I know our listeners and our viewers are thinking, yeah, you're GM of the St. Louis Rams, the Atlanta Falcons, or the Tampa Bay Bucks.
St. Louis Rams, where did that come?
Did I fall back on that one? How about that?
Wow,
you
went
LA
old
Rams,
school.
geez. Just showed my age there again. So, Chuck, tell us the difference, though, or the similarities in the position in college as we've grown accustomed to seeing in the NFL.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities. Basically, it all comes down to roster management, trying to find the best players that you can to outfit your roster every year, finding creative solutions to problems that everybody's dealing with. And now we have this money piece of it that everyone's dealing with, trying to integrate in the new salary cap portion as opposed to the old NIL model. And that's what everyone's dealing with. I think that's really the biggest similarity that you can draw between the college general manager and the pro general manager is everybody's dealing with roster management, and now everyone's dealing with the salary cap.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny hearing Chuck say the old NIL way, like it's 30
Months
years
ago,
old.
right?
It's 3 years ago, right? So
thing of the past.
so everyone knows. So now we're moving this summer. assuming everything moves legally in the right direction, which it appears it will, we're moving into revenue share. So teams are going to have an allotment of money to revenue share, not just with teams like football, but with all their sports. So it doesn't take away from the NIL. Isn't that correct, Chuck?
That's correct. Everything is going to still exist from an NIL space. The ability for an athlete to market their name, image, and likeness will still exist. I think what you'll see start to go away are the sweetheart deals that the local car dealership was, doing, where they were overpaying for a guy to do a very short.
Allegedly overpaying. Let's clarify that.
Allegedly overpaying. That's right. So now these players can still go out. They can still market their name, image, and likeness and profit off of that, while also being paid like a professional athlete directly through the school, assuming that this settlement goes through.
So, Chuck, let me just add to that. So explain to everybody, so in the NFL, obviously there's a hard salary cap, and there are implications when players get hurt or when players leave the team, but they're signing, obviously, multi-year deals, and there's certain things when you first enter the NFL that you're an exclusive rights player, at least through the first 3 years. One of the obstacles for all colleges, West Virginia included, is, now we have the lovely word portal. And obviously, as you're, negotiating and monitoring and structuring your salary cap at the same time, guys can come and go at will. So how much, I can't imagine, if you're ever in a comfort zone at any point during the year where you feel good about your roster, not just present, but future. Yeah,
I think the biggest thing with the portal existing, coexisting, I should say, with the NIL era and, now introducing the salary cap, is that you really do have, whatever your roster size is, everybody on that roster is a free agent at the end of the year. Everybody has the same opportunity to go and enter their name into the portal and see what other outside opportunities exist for them, whether that be playing time, whether that be financial implications. Everybody has that same opportunity, and so you don't have the luxury that I guess some professional organizations would have, knowing that this player's under contract, for the next 3 years. This player's under contract for the next 2 years. Let's focus on this group of upcoming free agents and figure out how we're going to best manage that group, whether that be re-sign them, tender them, franchise tag them, or let them walk. And then, possibly getting a reward for guys that go on and do sign a bigger contract, like a compensation pick. We don't have anything like that. If a player from West Virginia were to enter the portal and, made a seven-figure deal in the revenue share space and we got some sort of compensation for that, maybe that would change things up a little bit. But right now, everybody's just a free agent at the end of the year, and it makes it hard to project from an incoming high school class standpoint. Makes it hard to know what exactly you need to take and when you need to take it, in the portal as far as what exists. So it's difficult on everybody.
So talk to me, though, like when we compare it to the NFL in some regard, there's a cap in the NFL. You've got to, make sure everything fits there. For what you're going to do with revenue sharing coming into play, how do you go about trying to put a roster together, allocating funds where you feel like you've got depth in places and you're getting the best possible quarterback, left tackle, all the important positions? What is the balance that goes into that compared to, say, doing it in the league?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think everybody's charged with the challenge of trying to find and create value wherever you can. So if there's a player that we feel is worth X and we can sign them for a little bit less than that, obviously it always benefits us to do so. But with us particularly at West Virginia, our big thing is earned success, and so guys are going to come in on more or less of a prove it deal through the spring, and then the guys that earn the right to be on the field will get compensated a little bit later. So I guess the way that I'm looking at doing things, at the direction of Coach Rodriguez, is trying to make sure that we have money set aside and left over for when the season, is about to kick off, and we know who the, two deep is, who the starters are, and we can reward those guys accordingly. Don't want to overpay anybody coming in just because they were a, 4-star coming out of high school, or, they had 30 offers in the portal or anything like that. We want to make sure that the guys that are doing it right, that are, in a position to play and help the team out on the field, that those are the guys that get rewarded. So just finding a balance of, holding enough money back to reward the right guys, as well as, having enough up front to, sign the guys that we need to sign from an acquisition standpoint. It's a tough deal.
Actually, Chuck, that's a smart way to do it. And obviously, Chuck and I, to be transparent, have worked together, so we've dealt with some of the stuff recently, in fact. But I think it's smart to do that because, A, you're putting together some money that, you want to reward, Matt, but at the same time, you want to retain, right? So it's a double-edged sword where you're showing the player that, hey, we're rewarding you, but there's a part of it that's saying, hey, we're going to have to maybe go back to the table. We want to show you that we took the initiative of rewarding you, so hopefully that gives you the leg up when you go to renegotiate for the future year now that player's a star player, let's say.
That's exactly right.
Chuck, let me ask you, and this is not just a West Virginia, this is a more general question I wondered about. We have guys in professional sports in their 20s who are not yet fully mature, A, to handle the money, B, to not be looking over their shoulder at somebody else making the money. How does that trickle down when we're talking about kids just out of high school or 18 or 19-year-olds who we know, I remember that age, A, I couldn't handle money, and B, if I wondered if the guy at the locker next to me was making more, there is just inherent jealousy. What do we do about any of that? How do we handle some of that when the ego's involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's hard for any 18, 19, 20-year-old. That's probably 90% of our locker room, maybe a little bit more older guys now with these COVID years and JUCO years and everything else that's in play. But, predominant part of everyone's locker room is going to be comprised of 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And, that group of the team, they're immature. This is probably their first time having any sort of, significant allowance, so to speak. And for them to be able to juggle that it's difficult enough when these guys move off campus after their freshman year. Okay, now I got to pay rent. Now there's a water bill and an electric bill. Like, that's a difficult enough thing for those guys to manage on top of everything else that they're doing. And now, I think the old saying, more money, more problems is definitely true, where these guys get more money than they know what to do with. If they're not being educated on, making sure payments are tax exempt or withholding, payments for taxes at the end of the year, now all of a sudden they're looking around trying to find that next paycheck to pay off taxes from the year before. And it, goes into that old 30 for 30 broke that ESPN put out, over a decade ago. And I think that's what everybody's a little bit fearful of and trying to prevent, is not putting young people that, are in a situation to help themselves and their families out from a financial standpoint, and they've earned the right to do so, not putting those guys at a disadvantage by giving them money and not educating them on it. So I think everybody around the country in some way, shape, or form has some sort of financial literacy that they're putting on within their building. How often that's going on, what is it mandatory, those, different auxiliary pieces of it. I think that's for every individual organization to decide. But I know that's a thing in the NFL as well, where all the rookies kind of go through a little financial literacy course. And I think that's where you're going to start to see a lot of that. If it doesn't already exist with a bunch of programs, it's going to start to take place here over the next year or two.
Yeah, I'm glad you discussed that, because I think that's even a problem with professional athletes when they're young, having all this money in their early 20s. Now you're talking about teenagers, and you talk about locker room. You got to remember now, Matt, that you have coaches there that are 50, 60 years old and maybe making less money than an 18-year-old five-star who's come in, has never played a down of college sports. So, it works both ways with regard to checking your ego at the door. And I think, obviously they're all going to meet their new Uncle Sam, and they're going to have to deal with that.
He'll get his cut, yeah.
It's hard to educate young athletes, which I've been doing for 30-plus years, about the odds, the pyramid they call it, the odds of being a high school player to a high school star to a college athlete to a pro prospect to getting drafted and staying in the league. It's slim and none.
Yeah.
And there's the health issue too. So, or the injury issue, I should say. So it's, you can't always think, and most of these 18-year-olds and 19s, and Chuck, you can speak to this, all think, I'm making this money, I don't have to worry about it, I can spend it because I'm going to make it again next year, I'm going to make it again the year after, I'm going to be a first-round draft choice, I'm going to be a star NFL player or whatever sport it is. And again, the odds are slim and none it goes that smoothly. So is that something you guys have to constantly work on within the program to make sure these guys leave West Virginia, at least, in the best situation possible, financially speaking?
Yeah, I think, again, it all goes back to the education piece. If somebody's holding a certain amount of money that they've never, come into contact with before in their lives, you can't expect them to understand how to live their life accordingly. They're going to go out and they're going to make a fun purchase, whether that be a car that, loses a tremendous amount of value the second you drive it off the lot. They don't understand the depreciation factor that goes into that. And, hey, you're better off driving that, that same car that's got 10,000, miles and one previous owner, no accident damage, little things like that to educate them along the way. But again, you go give 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, significant, 5-figure deals or 6-figure deals. And now all of a sudden, not only do they have money to buy everything that they, see on the internet or see on social media that, oh, that'd be cool as they're scrolling on their phone. But you also have, maybe people in their lives, whether that be teammates or friends or family members that are, approaching them and, asking for a little bit of help with this payment or, hey, I got a business venture, I got an idea, and they need to be extremely careful with how they spend that money.
It is a fascinating landscape and an ever-changing space that is going to be college sports. Chuck Lillie is the first-year general manager at West Virginia. It's really interesting stuff, Chuck. We appreciate you spending some time with us. We'd love to catch up down the road.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it very much. All right, coming up, we have one agent who's mad at a bunch of teams because he thinks they're not spending appropriately. Surprising to hear an agent say that. Plus, we have a star player who has dumped his agent. He's going to be representing himself. We'll see what Hadley thinks about both of those stories and more as Deals and Deadlines continues next. All right, we continue with this episode of Deals and Deadlines with Hadley. I'm Matt. We thank you guys for spending your time with us. I want to talk to Hadley about what he loves to talk about, his business. These are the agents. I don't know if you've heard the name Scott Boras. You never heard that one?
I think I've heard.
All right.
We've discussed him before.
Once or twice.
We'll discuss about him again.
Right. So Scott Boras,
softball guy, right?
Yeah, he's new to it. Yeah, he's calling out Major League Baseball owners in the midst of the Vlad Guerrero stuff with Toronto. They couldn't reach an agreement as he faces free agency. His quote. His issue with teams, it's not small market, large market issues. It's how much of your revenue you're spending on your 40-man roster to show fans that you're committed. Now, he doesn't care that you're showing fans that you're committed. He cares that his guys are getting what he considers to be market value, whatever that price is. This is always a tough one, Hadley, right? That, let's use Vlad Guerrero as an example. Toronto came out and their GM said he was going to become the highest paid player in franchise history. He would have been a top 10, maybe top 5 paid player. Now, we don't know the construct of the deal.
Correct.
So when you give us the overall parameters, who knows? Is that AAV? Is that total? Is it deferred? We don't know any of that. So when Boras says this, maybe he has some more intel on it. But at the same time, he's really looking out for his own interests here because he wants the players to make the most. There is a team side of this that there's a business involved.
Correct. Listen, as an agent, we only care about our client, right? But the quality agents have to understand that the teams also have a big budget. We just talked to Chuck at West Virginia. He's got to worry about an entire team. We only care about our clients. And listen, he's got a great argument on why Vlad should be paid as much as he should be paid. And I do agree with him in part. And we've had other people on the show talk about that, teams have money to spend and certain teams have more because they don't mind paying the tax in baseball. But a lot of teams aren't even going to the extreme of spending what they should spend because they're about bottom line people. So they're only going to spend so much. At the same time, the Scott Boras, or any agent for that matter, is trying to do what's right for his client, which in turn is right for the agent, right? And there's another piece to it, which I think we may even talk about later, is if you don't do right by your client, you may get fired.
Right.
Even though you've done everything you can do. So sometimes you posture it out there in a way to show your client you're doing everything you can to get that client top dollar, But at the end of the day, you're protecting your best interest.
But also sometimes it just doesn't work out. And I'll use an example. Pete Alonso of the Mets headed to free agency. And for whatever reason, there just wasn't a market. That's the way it happens sometimes. It's not for lack of effort. It's not that Pete wasn't a good player. There just wasn't a market that developed. So at that point, you go back to your client and say, all right, the Mets are still interested, not at the price you want. There's another team or two, but it's not the robust market. And I've always thought this. You can get mad at the market, or you have to accept sometimes that's what the market is and make the best deal for you possible. In Vladdy's case, he's only got one team he can deal with right now.
Correct.
In Alonso's, it was everybody's. But to your point, the agent can only do so much. You can't create the market. You have to try to do your best within it.
Well, yes and no. So we'll use Pete Alonso. He did have a market set because the Mets offered him an extension, right? Way before he was testing free agency. And they felt that he was undervalued. Now, you have to, as an agent, then do your due diligence to see what is out there. Mm-hmm. Yes, you can do comparisons, but you also have to, off the record, get a feel for teams that would be in need. What would they get a sense that the market would be? And then go into the market kind of knowing what your value is. In that case, the market was obviously misread, and he's going to hopefully, he's got a multi-year deal, but it's really a one-year deal, and he'll test it again.
But it's an educated guess at poker a little bit, right?
It is, but not as much. When you're talking about tens of millions or hundreds of millions, that's listen, in NFL, if you think someone's worth 7 and it's 6, or 7 and it's 8, it's a small number. This was hundreds of millions missing the market. And not just length of contract, but per year average and total dollars. So it was a real misread. And that's the rub. And listen, no ill will toward any agent that goes through this, because I've dealt with it on both sides. It's not poker, because poker, you have no clue, right? You're going with odds, and strict odds, and you don't know what other people are doing. In this game, we talk to teams. We talked just recently about the combine, right? We talk off the record with teams. They're both trying to feel the market out. What's a top cornerback going to make? And I'm trying to feel it out because I have a top cornerback. So we're both trying. And where does he fit in your team if you were in the market? And where does he fit in the league as far as overall rating? So I can make an educated decision for my client as we negotiate with our current team, which happens.
Have you ever bluffed? And I use the poker analogy here in the way that I don't have a great deal over here. I don't have a great offer, not the offer we think we want. So I'm going to put it out there to other teams, poker style, and bluff your way to more. Is that even a possibility? Can they see through it?
I have not gone to that extreme, because what I don't want to happen is, we'll say the Mets have a $100 million deal on the table, and I say, well, I've already got $200 million. I need $3 million, and then I end up signing for under $100. Now anything I do in the future, not just with this player, but within the business, I now come across as, all right, this guy's going to say whatever he wants to say. It also goes to, I learned a long time ago in the mid-'90s, Bill Polian taught me this, and he used every swear word there was, and it was a great baptism for me with a first-round draft choice. And he taught me that when you go into a negotiations, if you go in with all the facts, with all the data that supports your case, and don't just pick a number out of the sky or use teams as leverage knowing you don't have those teams, it will bite you in the rear, not only with this player, but with future players, and it'll bite you in the rear with future general managers. So I took that to heart and have used that to this day, no matter what sport I've represented an athlete in, to make sure that sometimes do we exaggerate? Are we trying to say, hey, there's 4 teams when there's only 2? But if you only have 1, you can't go back to somebody else. So there is that fine line, a little pokerish. But you also have to be smart, and it
has limits.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly. You're just not going to go all in and say, all right, if we lose, no big deal. It's not a big deal.
Well, but it's the great point of there's another negotiation somewhere down the line that he's going to go, well, this guy last time. Okay, so on that note, let's transition to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who is a star player for the Oklahoma City Thunder, who has parted ways with his representation, and for now is going to serve as his own agent. I say now because the timing always matters. Are you up for a new deal? Are you already in a deal? Because at this point, you don't have to rush. If you've got a 4-year deal, you can let it play out and then serve the purpose of vetting all the potential agents. Let's say he got to a point where his next deal is on the table. In the NBA, it's pretty clear money, right? If you're a certain level, you're going to get the max.
Of all the sports, it's the simplest one to predict. So obviously what his thought process is for everyone listening is, if everything goes according to plan with Oklahoma City, he's going to sign the Supermax deal.
Right.
We are going to know what that is to the penny. So in theory, if the team's going to do a Supermax deal, anyone can do it.
Yeah.
He doesn't need an agent. Now, we'll use the word agent. Remember, there's a team of people that represents a player. There's marketing people, there's philanthropy people, there's management, there's daily operations. We service that in-house with all of our people on staff. He may have different people within one organization or multiple organizations that he's still keeping in place. He's just looking at, hey, I'm going to sign this Supermax deal. 4% fee is what the NBA pays. I don't need to pay that. And I can use that income to pay all these other people.
Right.
So it's not the craziest thing when you're a player like that. What people don't realize, or athletes don't realize, is when things don't go right or you have issues and you need to go to management, it's very difficult for management to negotiate with a player and say you're not worth what you think you are and not hurt your feelings.
Sure.
We're all human beings. So it's always good to have that third party, even a lawyer, right? You don't try not to go to a court representing yourself because you have a fool for a client, right? That's the old saying.
Sure.
So it's the same thing because there are things said in some negotiations, I would say most, that aren't really against the person, but it's just using numbers and facts and things and, hey, he's been injured and he had this issue off the field. I get where they're going, but if you say that to the person directly, that's going to hurt feelings.
Well, that's why you don't want to be in the room for that.
Correct.
Right.
So, but in this case, I think it's a unique thing. We've seen guys in the NFL do it too. There are unique things where they're way top of the food chain. They can sometimes, if not more times than not, get away with it. But, you'll see them as they go through their career revert back to their old agent or a new agent just because they realize, hey, to have this person in my corner when there's anything going on is worth the fee that I'm paying.
All right, one final thing I want to talk to you about, and this has to do with more with my business and the top of my business. When I continue to see these salaries of both in-game broadcasters and talk show hosts and people in media making the kind of money, Tom Brady signed the $37.5 million deal. It's a 10-year deal. Then we have Charles Barkley's making plus $20 million a year. Stephen A. Smith could be now making $25 million a year coming up. Troy Aikman, Romo, Joe Buck. I'm always fascinated because as somebody who I do have a business, you have a business, there's something called ROI, right? What is the return on my investment? And if I'm Fox and I'm paying Tom Brady $37.5 million, I'd like to see the line item that says we get that back. And maybe it's because the NFL is so just bathed in money, it's fine. Let me use a better one. Stephen A. Smith at $25 million. Pat McAfee at $17. How is ESPN justifying that at the same time when they're cutting so many other salaries? Do they get the return from these investments?
Well, obviously, we don't know their actual business. We don't know their spreadsheet. But to some degree, they are getting some sort of return. They're getting some sort of viewership. Is it changing their world? Probably not. But again, when you have the people that you want, you tend to overspend, let's call it. So you can now say we have the best of the best, at least the most popular, the most viewed, or the most talked about. So I don't think they really look at bottom line return on investment. I don't think that goes into that. I think also there's a lot of egos involved, not just with the people like you and people that are in the media, but the people behind the scenes to say, we got Tom Brady. Does it matter that you have Tom Brady doing it? There will be a lot of people that tell you he's average at best right now doing what he does as a broadcaster.
Does he bring viewers?
First of all, nobody brings viewers.
Except the game.
The game itself
Correct.
does. Does Charles Barkley bring viewers
That's
to watch
different.
something? Yes, because that's a show that is before the game.
Pat McAfee, same way.
Correct. Is it exciting that Dick Vitale is coming back this weekend? Am I going to watch it because it's Dick Vitale? I may, because I was a Dick Vitale fan. But do I even know when I turn on a game who the broadcaster is? I can care less. I'm watching the game, no matter what sport it is. So I don't think it really has a true return on investment. But I think that's with anything. It's a movie. When you have a certain character in it, do you have to pay? Are people going to watch the movie more if there's certain actors in it, or is it a great movie or a great show?
Well, but there's my point. Tom Hanks is in Forrest Gump. Tom Hanks' quote is $20 million. He gets some back end of it. Well, now the movie studio says, well, we just made $500 million. I can draw a line to it. That's the weirdness about the sports thing. And I'm happy for these guys. I don't care if they make the money. It's just a weird thing to try to make sense of.
No, it's in anything. It's even in radio and
let's not use radio. Let's not use it.
But at the end of the day, it's all it's again, there is some return on investment. You have to do it to some degree, otherwise you'd be out of business. Sure. But when you have these huge companies that, are having so many different streams of revenue coming in, that you're just, you want the biggest and the best so you can brag that you have the best. And again, the other thing is, even if it doesn't create a return on investment, if somebody leaves your network to somebody else, it's a black eye.
Sure.
Even if it's for more money that you weren't willing to spend, it's now a black eye.
It's
and it
the optics.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Unintended, black eye, right?
I see what you did.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So it's a, listen, at the end of the day, I think it's great for business. And I think it does trickle down to, local markets, because again, it's about, you develop a reputation, you develop a following, and people want you to be part of it. So it gives you leverage at all different levels of the media world.
Hopefully that trickles down to local radio.
That was the hint.
I saw what you were doing. All right. Remind you guys, please subscribe wherever it is you get your favorite podcast across all podcast platforms. Just search Deals and Deadlines. New episodes drop each and every Friday, and will be available on the 680 The Fan YouTube channel. Thanks to our producer, Bella. She kept the thing moving today. Thanks to you guys for spending your time with us. We'll do it again next week for Deals and Deadlines.